Hey, welcome to a new video. On a lovely day, a regular family gathers to celebrate a kid's birthday. Dad's busy grilling, mom's chatting with pals, and the children are captivated by a cowboy demonstrating lasso tricks. Later, as the kids start on the birthday cake, Cooper's daughter stops and stares into the distance. Cooper turns to see a massive nuclear mushroom cloud billowing over the city. Moments later, the shockwave hits their home. The homeowner rushes his family to a shelter, while Cooper and his daughter mount a horse and gallop away, with nuclear clouds mushrooming in the background. 219 years later, Lucy, a skilled young woman, lives in shelter number 33, with her dad and brother Norman. Sadly, every man around is a relative, so the council agrees she should marry someone from another colony. The joyful girl slips into the shared wedding gown as her neighbors, led by her dad, the shelter's warden, set up tables for the wedding in a field ringed by a 3D illusion of far-off mountains. Her father beams with happiness for his daughter, though he wishes her mother could have witnessed the day. Soon, the guests gather at the portal, overseen by the gatekeeper, Chad, Lucy's cousin. Secretly in love with Lucy, Chad accepts the need for genetic diversity. He presses a button and the portal swings open, admitting a delegation from a neighboring colony. Their leader asserts that in exchange for new blood, they must receive seeds and spare parts for their machines. A young man is introduced to Lucy, and their marriage is officially recorded. Everyone settles down to celebrate. Despite the guests appearing somewhat unconvincing, the shelter's residents choose to overlook this. Lucy's father gives a speech, expressing hope that future generations might live above ground. The celebration unfolds with dancing and merriment, although Norman seems less than thrilled. The groom requests to see the bedroom, and she leads him there. The newlyweds start their new life together while Norman patrols the colony and stumbles upon a dead colonist. Suddenly, Lucy hears a distant scream. She slips on a universal bracelet, which immediately alerts her that her new husband is contaminated with radiation, suggesting he came from the surface. Realizing he's been exposed, he attacks her, slamming her against the wall. Dizzy, she watches him grab a knife, poised to strike. Lucy taps into her training, attempting to disarm him, but he stabs her in the side. Just then, an alarm goes off. Distracted, he pauses, and Lucy takes the chance to knock him out with a fist to the head. She quickly tends to her wound, rushes to the armory, grabs a pistol, and heads back to where her community is gathered. She confronts and eliminates an alien intruder, but as she exits, she steps into a full-blown conflict. Lucy rescues Norman just as her estranged husband arrives, but her father quickly subdues him by holding him underwater in a barrel. Immediately after, her father hurries to investigate an alert about a breach at the shelter's entrance. Lucy chases after him, only to stop dead in her tracks at the sight of aliens holding the shelter's inhabitants hostage. The leader of the attackers gives her father a harsh ultimatum. Choose between his people or Lucy. As Lucy tries to grasp the gravity of the situation, her father swiftly locks her in a secure compartment for safety. Right after securing her, the captors abduct him and take him away, just as an explosion blasts open the gates. Are you new to this channel? Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And before we continue, also like the video. On the surface, at the Brotherhood of Steel's barracks, a group of young men are roughing up one of their own, Paladin Maximus. His friend steps in, helps him recover, and escorts him to training classes where they learn vital survival skills for the wasteland, preparing to become knights. They train to be seekers and guardians, learning to identify ancient artifacts. During this time, the arrival of Steel Knights at the base fills Maximus with awe. Later, his friend takes him to a hangar to view their stored armor, and soon after, they hear cheers of celebration as some among them receive promotions. His friend is appointed assistant to Knight Titus. The next morning, a scream jolts the barracks awake. It emerges that a blade had been hidden in the newly promoted assistant's boot, severely injuring her foot. Maximus is then apprehended and taken to face the Brotherhood's leader. In the shelter, calm is being re-established. Lucy is sewing up her stomach wound as people convene for a council meeting. She proposes sending a team to the surface to locate her father, but the council declines. Undeterred, Lucy collects essential supplies and heads for the gates, her brother by her side. Chad tries to join them, but she sedates him and bids farewell to Norman. As the gates swing open, she steps onto the surface. She looks out over a sandy world, still bearing scars of past calamities, and begins her journey toward the sea. Maximus stands accused of harming a fellow soldier out of jealousy, but he maintains his innocence. The leader, recognizing his honesty, clears him of the charges and names him assistant to a Steel Knight. The following day, the leader charges the Knights and their assistants with the mission to capture an escaped scientist who has absconded with a crucial artifact. Knight Titus and Maximus board a helicopter, setting off to their assigned sector. Meanwhile, a group of bounty hunters entice a wild ghoul from its resting place to help them track down a scientist. They head towards the witch Moldiver, with whom the ghoul has a past connection. Surprisingly, the ghoul turns on the hunters and flees on his own. Lucy navigates the barren surface and one evening decides to set up camp near a deserted house. She builds a fire and drifts off to sleep beside it. She is awakened by odd noises and discovers a dog attacking a gigantic insect. A man sitting by her fire explains that the cockroaches not only survived the nuclear explosions, but have also mutated into formidable creatures. He suggests she return to the safety of her shelter, warning her of her unfamiliarity with the surface world's dangers. Despite his advice, Lucy is determined to continue her search for her father. The man departs, leaving her to ponder her next move. At the same time, the Steel Knight and Maximus arrive in the designated sector. Nearby, the fugitive scientist and his dog take refuge in a cave. Soon after, the knight and his assistant reach the area. Maximus quickly spots the scientist's tracks leading into the cave, prompting the knight to enter. Despite lacking armor, Maximus follows. Inside, they are attacked by a gigantic mutant cave bear. The knight battles the creature but is quickly overwhelmed, and in a panic, he flees. Maximus, left to confront the bear alone, managed to defeat the massive animal. The knight, exposed as cowardly, berates and insults Maximus. In response, Maximus chooses not to aid the injured knight, letting him succumb to his wounds and resolves to pursue the scientist on his own. He dons the knight's armor and discovers its capabilities, amazed by the newfound strength and the vast possibilities now open to him. By chance, Maximus ends up saving someone who turns out to be less than virtuous, prompting him to consider more carefully who deserves his protection. Meanwhile, Lucy arrives in a town where she was told she might find clues about her father's abductors. She walks into a shop where an elderly saleswoman, recognizing her as from a shelter, warns her to leave immediately. She explains that shelters were underground sanctuaries where the affluent hid as the world above fell apart, suggesting that the townsfolk are unlikely to assist her. Outside the shop, the scientist with the dog reappears, surprised to see Lucy still around. Suddenly, the saleswoman, who was waiting for him, calls out to him just as a ghoul shows up, intent on capturing the scientist. When the saleswoman offers a bounty for anyone who helps protect the scientist, the ghoul shoots him in the leg to stop him from fleeing and confronts those tempted by the reward, gunning them down. Lucy sneaks back into the shop, finds the order book, and gets Moldiver's address. As she prepares to leave, she witnesses the ghoul injuring the scientist's dog and hears his plea for help. She intervenes, shooting the ghoul with a capsule, which only makes him laugh. Then a knight, Maximus, lands beside them. He asks Lucy to care for the scientist while he engages the ghoul. Inside, the saleswoman fits the scientist with an iron leg and decides to join Lucy in traveling to Moldiver, providing the coordinates. As they depart, the battle outside continues. Maximus struggles to fully utilize his suit's capabilities, losing his navigation function and getting thrown far from the shop. The ghoul, realizing his target has slipped away, ends his pursuit. While on their journey, Lucy and the scientist pause for a rest, and Lucy is struck by the sight of the scientist's blood-soaked leg. Realizing the gravity of their situation, the scientist confirms her fears, revealing that he won't survive much longer but insists she must deliver his head to Moldiver. With his last strength, he produces a saw and then dies. Later, the ghoul discovers the scientist's decapitated body in the sandy wasteland and follows Lucy's tracks as she carries the head toward Moldiver. Exhausted, Lucy stops again to rest, and while eating, she curiously examines the head, wondering about its significance. To ensure it can be tracked, she inserts a tracking device into its nostril. Meanwhile, Maximus inspects his armor and discovers a malfunction. He's unexpectedly contacted by the base, which takes him by surprise. He reports the death of his assistant and the plans for a replacement, which he strongly resists. He heads to the nearest town, finds a workshop, and spends all his money to fix the broken module. Returning to his suit, he finds a group of local marauders attempting to strip the armor for parts. During the ensuing scuffle, he is struck hard in the face. Regaining consciousness, he sees the compromised armor and grabs a nearby piece of metal, using it to fend off the attackers. As he assesses the damage, a helicopter lands, delivering his new assistant. The new assistant is unexpectedly one of the bullies from Maximus's training camp. Maximus swiftly secures his helmet, concealing his identity, and the new assistant remains unaware of the switch. Lucy arrives at the remnants of what used to be Hollywood. While pausing by a pond, a mysterious creature attacks, stealing the backpack containing the scientist's head before vanishing into the water. Lucy attempts to track the thief, but soon finds herself in the ghoul's view, to whom she explains the loss of the head. Meanwhile, back at the shelter, the council investigates Lucy's departure, leading Norman to realize that no one is planning to actively search for either his father or his sister in the wasteland. Maximus takes out his frustrations on the new assistant by subjecting him to various hardships, retaliating for earlier abuses. Yet the assistant continues to dutifully serve. Using a specialized device, they pick up the ghoul's trail, follow it, and eventually discover the scientist's headless body. Meanwhile, the ghoul orchestrates a plan to catch the underwater monster, using Lucy as bait. The creature soon surfaces, seizing Lucy, but the ghoul intervenes and rescues her. Lucy narrowly avoids a severe attack, but the creature manages to escape with one of her boots. Frustrated, the ghoul forcefully pulls her along. At the same time, while the Steel Knight's assistant is filling the armor with water, he shares stories from his life. Suddenly, Maximus encourages him to talk about himself. The assistant reveals that he was actually a decent person, and that the beatings were a part of an initiation tradition for all newcomers. He expresses regret that Maximus was believed dead before he could be officially called up for service. They continue on and soon arrive at the pond. They enter the water and quickly spot the monster. Maximus instructs the assistant to retreat to the shore and engages the creature alone. However, the assistant fires at the monster, drawing its attention. The beast lunges at him, but Maximus rescues the assistant from its jaws just as the creature dies, expelling the scientist's head and Lucy's boot in its final throes. Then a dog appears and joins their group. The ghoul escorts Lucy through the barren landscape, refusing to give her water, and they eventually come upon the ruins of what was once a movie studio, where actor Cooper and his wife used to work. They soon arrive at an old clinic, from which the sounds of a man's agony echo. Inside, they encounter a former associate of the ghoul who is undergoing painful mutations. The condition could be eased with specific drugs, but lacking these, the ghoul mercifully ends the man's suffering. Lucy is confused by this act, but the ghoul explains that they need sustenance. Lucy protests that although times have been hard for her as well, they never resorted to cannibalism. Nevertheless, the ghoul forces Lucy to help butcher the body for them to carry the meat. They press on, with Lucy struggling increasingly without water. The journey continues until the ghoul halts in front of a dilapidated structure where radioactive water has pooled. Overcome by thirst, Lucy can't help but drink from it, earning a nod of approval from her companion. She's beginning to grasp the harsh realities of life in the wasteland. He represents her future, and it seems imminent. However, when he suddenly coughs, Lucy seizes the moment to attempt an escape, but is thwarted at the edge of a large crater, caught by his lasso. In a desperate bid for freedom, she accidentally bites off one of the ghoul's fingers, prompting him in retaliation to sever one of hers. Eventually, they arrive at an old supermarket where the ghoul negotiates to trade her for the supplies he needs. Shocked, Lucy walks into the supermarket just as the ghoul collapses, unconscious. Inside, Lucy is welcomed by a robot, which offers to replace her missing finger. Following the robot, she receives a new prosthetic finger. However, the robot then reveals its intentions to harvest her organs and immediately sedates her. Later, back at the shelter, Norman is distributing food to the aliens they captured during an attack. One of the aliens reveals that the residents of shelter number 32, which they had previously captured, were plotting something sinister. Norman attempts to look up information on shelter number 32, but discovers that the data are classified. Along with Chad, he clears debris to enter shelter number 32, only to find a ruined landscape and the mummified remains of its residents. They realize that these inhabitants must have perished by turning on each other before the aliens even arrived. Lucy awakens to find herself and many other women encased in glass chambers, set to be harvested for their organs. As a robot approaches to begin the extraction on her, it surprisingly cuts her bonds instead of her chest. She quickly escapes from beneath its saw and manages to disable the robot. Armed with syringes filled with drain cleaner, she reprograms the robot to assist her, and together they confront the operators of this grim facility. She coerces them into freeing the imprisoned women. While many escape, some do not. Lucy then demands the release of the last captives. Reluctantly, the owners open the remaining cages, releasing zombies who instantly attack and dismember two of the organ traders. Lucy watches the chaos unfold in shock as the last zombie turns to her, but she discovers a pistol in her grasp, ready to defend herself. Norman and Chad delve deeper into their exploration of the nearby shelter and uncover that its entrance had been unlocked from the outside using a key labeled with the names of Norman and Lucy's mother. Meanwhile, Lucy stumbles upon medication that could prolong the ghoul's life. Despite the harsh treatment she has faced, she chooses to give the medicine to the ghoul. This act reaffirms that although she might physically resemble him after her ordeals, she will never mirror his internal nature. After handing over the medicine, Lucy departs, leaving the ghoul to enter a broken-down store to gather the drugs needed to stabilize himself. He fills his hat with various medications, but his attention shifts when he spots a video recorder. He inserts an old tape featuring Cooper as a cowboy and sits down to watch it, momentarily distracted from his bleak surroundings. Maximus and his assistant, Foos, take a break to rest. Foos, overjoyed at being rescued, a rarity as knights often treat their assistants harshly, requests to be formally branded as part of the team. Maximus agrees and lifts his helmet to perform the ritual. However, upon seeing Maximus's face, Foos attacks him, resulting in Maximus breaking his leg. Despite this, Foos manages to remove a nuclear core from Maximus's armor, rendering the exoskeleton immobile, and escapes with the scientist's head. Soon after, giant cockroaches swarm the disabled suit, trapping Maximus inside. As he braces for the worst, gunfire disperses the insects, and Lucy arrives. She explains her need for the scientist's head and assists Maximus out of his suit, also providing him with medicine for radiation sickness. Once Lucy has recuperated, she proposes that they pursue the stolen head together since she has installed a tracker on it. In exchange for their help in retrieving the head, she suggests they ask the Brotherhood to aid in locating her father. Maximus agrees to the plan, seeing it as a way to rectify the chaos and lend a hand. Meanwhile, back in Shelter 33, Betty is elected as the new warden in place of Lucy's father, a decision Norman finds unsettling. Delving into the shelter's history, he discovers that all previous wardens were chosen from the residents of Shelter 31, which intrigues him. On the surface, Lucy and Maximus come to a bridge where they encounter a pair of vagrants. The vagrants act frightened and ask for permission to pass. As Lucy and Maximus, with raised hands, try to calmly walk away, Maximus, sensing danger, acts first and shoots, thereby saving their lives but injuring his hand in the process. This incident highlights to Lucy the naivety of the shelter's residents. Continuing their journey, they see a billboard for the New California Republic. Lucy feels disillusioned, having believed their mission was to help rebuild America, only to find that society has moved on without them. Maximus tries to comfort her, pointing out that the Republic doesn't actually exist. Their path then leads them to a massive crater in the city. Maximus reveals he survived the disaster by hiding in a refrigerator. Noticing Maximus's wound is worsening, Lucy guides him to a nearby building marked as a clinic. However, as Maximus lags and eventually enters the building, he finds Lucy gone. He searches for her and ends up trapped in a chamber between two doors, where he is overcome by gas and loses consciousness. Betty takes her group to Shelter 32 to propose a partial relocation, citing the untapped value of its resources. Chad and Norman are taken aback to find that the corpses and any evidence of the past tragedy have been cleared away. Norman questions what happened to his mother's key after she died. Betty reveals that they buried the key along with her. Meanwhile, Maximus and Lucy awaken in another shelter, lying on stretchers. Maximus is promptly given medical attention. The shelter leader, recognizing the couple's needs, invites them to stay while Maximus recovers, mentioning that suppliers have located his armor and will be delivering it soon. Lucy expresses gratitude for their hospitality, and the leader shares with her that she, like many others, was actually born on the surface. During their quarantine period, Maximus and Lucy have a revealing conversation. It comes out that Maximus has never experienced romantic affection. Lucy finds herself in the position to educate him about this aspect of human interaction, which, though common in the shelter, embarrasses him since such expressions of affection are not typical among knights. Later during lunch, Lucy and Maximus notice that many people around them have various physical abnormalities. Surprisingly, the caretaker is a Cyclops. This is unusual for Lucy, but Maximus seems unfazed. Eventually, the caretaker reveals to Lucy that they welcome people from the surface, which astonishes her because such a practice was strictly forbidden in her shelter. However, when she inquires about a restricted level they were warned not to visit, the caretaker abruptly cuts off the conversation. Maximus discovers a room housing a nuclear block that powers the entire underground facility. The leader gives him an electronic key to his own personal compartment, suggesting he take some time to rest. Upon entering, Maximus is amazed to find a basket filled with a variety of delicacies and items he has never encountered before. For the first time, he experiences a real shower, dons a robe and slippers, and savors the unfamiliar treats. Meanwhile, Lucy discovers a room that vividly narrates the entire history of the Californian Republic. She learns that life here was restored in 2142, but fell into ruin again by 2277. Lucy is dismayed, wondering about the necessity and motives behind initiating a new war. Just then, a sound signal interrupts her thoughts, and all the shelter inhabitants are summoned to a specific location. In a different scene, a ghoul is apprehended by the self-proclaimed new president of the region, who was previously involved in the organ trade at a supermarket. The ghoul is falsely accused of destroying this establishment. Requesting only a needle and thread to reattach his finger, he also asks for directions to Moldiv. Instead of assisting, the president orders the ghoul's execution. Forced to fend for himself, the ghoul decides to take down the new enforcers as he continues his quest for the woman. Lucy, following the crowd, arrives in a room centered around an altar with burning candles. The atmosphere grows intense as people start chanting and swaying their hands, pulling Lucy into a trance. The ritual escalates as participants begin to undress, startling Lucy. A bowl circulates, and everyone takes some powder to smear on their faces. Lucy is horrified to realize it's the ashes of the dead. In another bowl, there is blood. The group invokes the Mother of Flame for salvation, and an image of Moldiver appears above them. Overwhelmed by fear, Lucy rushes to find Maximus, urging him to escape with her. However, finding himself in such blissful conditions for the first time, Maximus is reluctant to leave. Frustrated and desperate, Lucy decides to venture into the forbidden level alone. Lucy ventures into a laboratory that seems to have been used for genetic experimentation on humans. She is appalled as she surveys the horrific displays and notices glass cryogenic capsules holding human bodies. Suddenly, the lights flicker on, and a man in a white coat walks in. Lucy quickly hides, but the noise she makes attracts the man's attention, and he discovers her. Although Lucy attempts to resist, additional men arrive, overpower her, and forcibly take her to the upper level. Elsewhere, the ghoul reaches the home of a man known as the Digger, whose eldest son is reputed to know the whereabouts of Moldiver. Under threat, the terrified man commands his son to divulge everything he knows. The boy reveals that the woman they seek is at the observatory. Just as the ghoul prepares to leave, however, the boy makes a fatal attempt on his life and is killed by the ghoul in self-defense. At the same time, the shelter leaders chastise Lucy for her actions. They remind her that they offered her refuge, food, and medical treatment for her friend. However, Lucy is outraged by the inhumane experiments she has witnessed. The leaders then show her a full recording of an attack on the laboratory by the very monster that nearly devoured her. They explain that it was the shelter's original inhabitants who conducted these gruesome experiments, turning people into monsters, and that their current efforts are merely to ease the suffering of those who survived. They reveal that each shelter is tasked with its own specific experiment, a fact Lucy was unaware of. Despite this, they decide that Lucy must be punished for her disobedience and lead her away, a scene that Maximus witnesses. Exhausted, Maximus stops to rest and realizes that his leg is severely injured. Annoyed by a dog, he secures it in a metal box and then sets out to find a radio tower to contact the Brotherhood. Meanwhile, the shelter inhabitants decide to exile Lucy to the surface, unexpectedly providing her with a supply of food. Lucy is shocked, as this turn of events aligns with her desires. In her final words, she pleads for them to allow her friend to remain in the shelter. Just then, Maximus arrives outfitted in knight's armor, into which he has integrated the stolen nuclear block. He begins to disperse the crowd, but Lucy stops him, explaining that the shelter leaders are releasing her anyway. They ascend to the surface, and upon learning that Maximus has taken the nuclear block, Lucy persuades him to return it, explaining that the shelter relies on it for energy. Reluctantly, they lower the block back to the shelter. Touched by his action, Lucy calls him a good person. In response, Maximus reveals that he let another knight die to take his armor, admitting he's not truly good, but he earnestly wishes to accompany her. Meanwhile, Thaddeus encounters a man who identifies himself as a doctor and offers to fix his injured leg. The man leads Thaddeus to an abandoned clinic where, in exchange for the nuclear block, he provides him with a potion. After drinking it, Thaddeus ecstatically observes his leg appearing to heal. At the same time, the ghoul finds the locked dog that Thaddeus had left behind, and it begins to lead him on Thaddeus's trail. At the same time, Thaddeus reaches a radio station surrounded by lethal traps that dismember anyone who gets too close. He manages to send a signal to the Brotherhood and, while awaiting their arrival, engages in conversation about music with the radio station's owner. Suddenly, Maximus and Lucy show up. Lucy requests the scientist's head. In a fateful mishap, Thaddeus steps on a trap and an arrow pierces his neck. Oddly, he feels no urge to die, leading Maximus to realize Thaddeus has become a zombie. Thaddeus regrets trusting the dubious doctor, and knows that now he can never join the Brotherhood, as they would surely kill him on sight. At that moment, helicopters appear on the horizon. Maximus quickly devises a plan, suggesting to Thaddeus that he hand over the scientist's head and escape, which Thaddeus does. Then Maximus gives the real head to Lucy and grabs the head of an unfortunate victim from a nearby trap as a decoy. He urges Lucy to run. She kisses him and promises to wait for him in Shelter 33. Meanwhile, residents of Shelter number 33 start receiving relocation notifications to a neighboring block. Seizing the moment, Norman manipulatively accesses the caretaker system of Shelter 31 and heads there. As rescue helicopters land, the Brotherhood's agents take Maximus to their camp. He hands over the decoy head to the leader, and upon realizing it's a fake, they sentence him to death. Just then, his friend, terrified of joining the search, admits to self-amputating her leg. Maximus blurts out that he knows the location of the real head. The leader, intrigued, orders his release, and they all prepare for an impending expedition. At the same time, Lucy arrives at the observatory where she finds her father trapped in a cage, sitting at a table. Moldiver welcomes her, but Lucy is shocked to see a desiccated yet still alive mummy sitting next to the host. Lucy agrees to hand over the scientist's head in exchange for her father's freedom. Moldiver extracts a vial from the head and offers to reveal the true story of her father, although he pleads with his daughter not to listen. Moldiver starts her tale. Elsewhere, Norman discovers a robot equipped with a human brain in the hidden quarters of Shelter 31. The robot abruptly attempts to inject him with a substance, and Norman narrowly evades the deranged machine's attack. Moldiver's narrative takes Lucy back to the years before the war, focusing on actor Cooper, who becomes increasingly concerned after hearing his wife discuss the looming threat of nuclear war. Motivated by his worries, Cooper sneaks into her workplace and eavesdrops on a corporate council meeting using a listening device he had placed on his wife. The billionaires at the meeting lament the global decline in sales, but soon shift their discussion to the concept of shelters. One member questions the need for shelters, arguing that survivors from the surface would simply overpower those emerging after hiding underground. The response is that one could feasibly live underground for centuries thanks to vast resources, effectively outlasting surface survivors with time as their ally. The meeting is disrupted by Cooper's wife, who, driven by her maternal instincts, interjects to advocate for the best possible future for her daughter. Meanwhile, in the present, Norman discovers a room lined with rows of cryogenic capsules, each bearing the names of those who once occupied them, including all past wardens, among them his own father. The story shifts back to the past, where Cooper's wife divulges that over 100 shelters have been constructed across America, each designed to allow its inhabitants to pursue their wildest dreams in the future. Norman learns from the robot that these individuals were chosen for their creative thinking and positivity, representing the best of the country's gene pool, destined to rejuvenate the nation once the surface world is deemed safe again. Amidst this discussion, the debate intensifies as the moral implications of annihilating so many people weigh heavily on the group. Then Cooper's wife proposes that they initiate the war themselves. She argues that a nuclear war, while tragic, presents a unique opportunity to start anew without any opposition, effectively giving them a monopoly over the world. At this moment, Cooper is approached by a young man seeking an autograph. This young man is Lucy's father. In the present, Moldiv reveals that this man has lived an exceptionally long time and was part of the corporation responsible for these catastrophic plans, yet he never disclosed any of this to his wife. His wife, highly intelligent, was the first to notice that water was mysteriously disappearing from the shelter. She deduced that civilization was resurging, but her concerns were dismissed by her husband as paranoia. Taking matters into her own hands, she took their children and escaped to a burgeoning city. However, her efforts to find safety were crushed when her husband, along with his men, found them and destroyed the place. Lucy has brought Moldiver the sea fusion technology she developed, which had been stolen by corporations. This technology promises infinite energy capable of revitalizing life. During their interaction, Lucy notices a pendant around the mummy's neck, one that belonged to her mother, and she begins to piece together her mother's fate. Her father urges her not to trust Moldiver, but Lucy insists that he give her the synthesis code for the technology. Eventually, he acquiesces and gives her the numbers. Determined, Lucy heads to the laboratory to initiate the cold fusion process. Meanwhile, the robot informs Norman that after discovering so much, it cannot allow him to leave. Simultaneously, as Lucy's father implores her to unlock his cage and come home, alarms blare and Brotherhood helicopters swarm over the observatory, launching an attack. Knights and their assistants quickly descend and clash with the observatory's defenders. Amidst the chaos, Maximus frantically searches for Lucy while the Knights continue their assault. Suddenly, as the Knights infiltrate the building, they are halted by a ghoul. It is revealed that this ghoul once wore similar armor and thus knows their weaknesses, allowing him to take down the armored knights with ease while remaining unscathed himself. At that moment, Lucy is overwhelmed with emotion, caught between her father's pleas to return home and the grim revelations about her mother. Suddenly, a wounded knight collapses at the threshold of the room, quickly followed by Maximus. He frees Lucy's father from the cage and rushes to Lucy's side. However, Lucy reveals that it was her father who destroyed his beloved city. In response, her father quickly dons armor, shoves Maximus aside with force, rendering him unconscious. Lucy draws a gun, but then the ghoul enters the room. Recognizing Lucy's surname, the ghoul is shocked to learn she's related to the man from the corporation he has been searching for over 200 years, eager to discover the fate of his family. Lucy's father activates jet engines on his suit and escapes, leaving a trail behind. It turns out that this is precisely what the ghoul needed, as the trail will lead them directly to the secret location of the world's rulers, the architects of the nuclear war. The ghoul invites Lucy to join him on this pursuit. Determined, Lucy fires at the mummy, bids a solemn farewell to the unresponsive Maximus, and departs with the ghoul, ready to confront her father and those responsible for the devastation. Meanwhile, an injured Moldiver makes her way back to the room where Maximus is just coming to. She has successfully activated the nuclear synthesis, providing infinite energy to the people. A bewildered Maximus watches as lights begin to illuminate the remnants of the city, a sign of the new energy source taking effect. As Moldiver smiles and passes away, the arriving Brotherhood members mistakenly believe their comrade was responsible for her death and hail Maximus as a hero, celebrating him as a future knight. At the same time, the ghoul and Lucy are on the trail of her father, who is making his way through the desert towards a distant city. This pursuit marks the end of the series, leaving the final outcomes to the imagination. I hope you enjoyed it. If so, like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend. See you in the next one.